Blood stained Axel Grimes's past, marking him as a man destined to walk alone beneath the endless prairie skies. Men feared him, and he preferred it that way. At 34, with 15 notches on his gun belt each earned in fair fights, the former bounty hunter had settled for a solitary life running cattle on his small spread outside Redemption, Wyoming Territory, 1878. But fate had other plans, revealed on a night when thunder split the heavens and rain washed away the barriers he'd built around his heart. The storm caught Axel returning from town, his saddlebags filled with supplies, his mind on the broken fence line that needed mending before his small herd could stray. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the rugged landscape in harsh white flashes that made his stallion, Diablo, nervous beneath him. "Easy, boy," Axel murmured, his low voice barely audible above the wind. His calloused hand patted the horse's neck, feeling the tension in the animal's muscles. Just a bit further. The rain came down in sheets, turning the trail into slick mud. In the distance, his cabin appeared like a shadow against the stormy backdrop, a humble structure he'd built with his own hands after deciding that a life pursuing men for bounty had hollowed him out. 3 years of peace had done little to quiet the ghosts that haunted him, but at least here, among his 20 head of cattle and the wild Wyoming landscape, he answered to no one. Lightning flashed again, and Diablo reared, nearly unseating him. When the horse settled, Axel's trained eyes caught movement where none should be near the woodpile alongside his cabin. He drew his Colt, the action as natural as breathing. "Who's there?" he called, voice hard with warning. No answer came, but as he approached cautiously, dismounting and leading Diablo by the reins, he saw it again, a slight movement in the shadows. Keeping his gun ready, he moved closer, prepared for trouble. What he found instead stopped him cold. A woman huddled against the logs, her dress soaked through, her body trembling violently. Her face was partially hidden by dark hair plastered to her skin by the rain, but when she looked up at him, her eyes were wide with unmistakable terror. "Please," she whispered, barely audible above the storm. "Don't tell him where I am." Axel holstered his gun slowly, conscious of her fear. "Who's after you, madam?" She shook her head, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. Her lips had turned blue with cold, and Axel recognized the early signs of exposure. "I can't help you if you don't tell me," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew he'd already made his decision. "Come inside. Whatever trouble you're in, you'll catch your death out here first." When she didn't move, he added, "I give you my word. No harm will come to you under my roof." After a moment's hesitation, she nodded, attempting to stand but faltering. Without asking permission, Axel lifted her into his arms, surprised at how little she weighed. She stiffened at his touch but didn't fight him as he carried her toward the cabin door. "Name's Axel Grimes," he said as he shouldered open the door. "And you are?" "Rachel," she murmured against his shoulder. "Rachel Sullivan." Inside, Axel set Rachel down gently on the room's only chair before quickly building up the fire in the stone hearth. The cabin was simple but sturdy, one main room with a cast iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a small bookshelf filled with worn volumes, and a bed tucked in the corner. A ladder led to a small loft where he stored supplies. "You need dry clothes," he said matter-of-factly, turning his back to give her privacy as he rummaged through a trunk. He pulled out a flannel shirt and woolen trousers that would swallow her frame. "These will be too big, but they're dry. I'll step outside to see to my horse. You change." Rachel clutched the offered clothes with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Outside, Axel quickly unsaddled Diablo and led him into the small lean-to stable attached to the cabin. As he rubbed the horse down, his mind raced. A woman alone in these parts meant trouble, the kind he'd sworn to avoid. Yet something in her eyes had reached past his defenses. Fear, yes, but also a quiet dignity that spoke of strength beneath the fragility. When he judged enough time had passed, he knocked on his own door. "Decent?" "Yes," came the soft reply. Rachel stood by the fire, drowning in his clothes, her wet dress draped over a chair to dry. Her dark hair hung in damp waves past her shoulders, and in the firelight, he could see her features clearly for the first time. High cheekbones, a straight nose, and eyes the color of summer sage. Beautiful, despite the bruise darkening her left cheekbone and the split in her lower lip. Anger flared in his chest at the sight of those injuries, but he kept his expression neutral. "You hungry?" She nodded, and he set about heating a pot of beans and bacon he'd prepared earlier. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the persistent drumming of rain on the roof. "Whoever did that to your face?" Axel finally said, keeping his voice casual as he stirred the pot. "He the one you're running from?" Rachel's hand rose unconsciously to her bruised cheek. "My husband," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Axel nodded, unsurprised. "He in town?" "Yes, at the Golden Rail Hotel." She swallowed hard. "He's looking for me. By now, he'll have half the men in Redemption searching." "Important man, is he?" "Edwin Sullivan. He owns the largest cattle operation in Colorado Territory. We were traveling through to Cheyenne on business when She faltered. "When I finally found the courage to run." Axel placed a steaming bowl of beans before her along with a chunk of cornbread. "Eat, then rest. Nobody's going to find you tonight in this storm." "You don't understand," Rachel said, her voice rising slightly with urgency. "Edwin has connections. He'll offer rewards. He'll say I'm unwell, that I need to be found for my own safety. People will believe him. People in town don't know me well enough to come asking questions," Axel replied. "And those who do know me know better than to trespass on my land. You're not taking me back." The hope and disbelief in her question made his chest tighten. "Madam Rachel, I've never forced anyone to go anywhere they didn't want to go. Not unless they had a bounty on their head, and I don't suppose you're wanted by the law." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "No, not by the law." "Then eat your supper and stop worrying for tonight at least." While she ate, Axel checked his rifle and pistol, loading both fully. If Sullivan was the type of man who'd strike his wife, he was the type who might come calling with violence. Axel had left that life behind, but the skills remained. After eating, Rachel's eyelids grew heavy, the ordeal of her escape catching up with her. Axel dragged a buffalo robe near the fire and laid out a bedroll. "You take the bed," he said, gesturing to the corner. "I'll sleep here. I couldn't, you can and will. My mother would haunt me if I let a lady sleep on the floor." Too exhausted to argue, Rachel retreated to the bed, though Axel noticed she lay facing the door, her body tense even in exhaustion. He stretched out on his bedroll, listening to the storm and the woman's gradually steadying breathing as she finally surrendered to sleep. Morning arrived with cleared skies and 1,000 practical problems. Axel rose early, built up the fire, and had coffee brewing before Rachel stirred. She sat up slowly, momentarily confused by her surroundings until memory returned, bringing with it a look of renewed apprehension. "Coffee?" Axel offered, pouring a cup without waiting for an answer. She accepted it gratefully, her fingertips brushing his as she took the tin mug. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through him that he quickly dismissed. "I need to leave," she said after taking a sip. "I've imposed enough, and it's not safe for you if Edwin discovers you've helped me." Axel leaned against the table, studying her. In daylight, the bruise on her face looked worse, now a sickly yellow-purple. "And where exactly do you plan to go, Mrs. Sullivan?" I have an aunt in Oregon." If I could just get to the next town, find work for a while to earn stage fare. Axel shook his head. Your husband will have telegraphed ahead to every town within 100 miles by now. The truth of his words visibly deflated her. Then what am I to do? Stay here, at least until the bruises fade and we can figure out a better plan. I can't ask that of you. You didn't ask. I offered. Axel poured himself coffee, considering his next words carefully. I need to ride into town today. Need to know what we're facing. Fear flashed in her eyes. He'll see you. He'll know. Sullivan's never laid eyes on me. I keep to myself, remember? I'll just be another rancher come to town for supplies. After some arguing, Rachel reluctantly agreed, but only after Axel promised to be careful and showed her where he kept a loaded shotgun beneath the bed. Anyone comes that isn't me, you point this at the door and use it if necessary, he instructed. Axel rode into redemption with his hat pulled low and his demeanor matching the other rough men who frequented the small frontier town. The main street consisted of a general store, a blacksmith, 2 saloons, the sheriff's office, and the 2-story Golden Rail Hotel where Sullivan was supposedly staying. The town buzzed with unusual activity. Outside the sheriff's office, a notice had been posted offering $500 for information about Rachel Sullivan, described as a disturbed woman who had wandered off in a state of confusion. The reward caught Axel's attention. $500 was a fortune in these parts, enough to tempt even relatively honest men. Inside the general store, Mr. Peterson, the proprietor, was engaged in animated conversation with 2 well-dressed strangers. One, a tall man with meticulously groomed side whiskers and cold eyes, was showing a photograph around. My wife's condition requires immediate medical attention, the man was saying, his cultured voice carrying an edge of impatience. I fear what might happen if she remains exposed to the elements in her fragile mental state. Axel pretended interest in a shelf of canned goods while listening intently. The speaker could only be Edwin Sullivan. Despite his polished appearance and smooth words, something in the man's demeanor set Axel's instincts on edge, the same instincts that had kept him alive through years of tracking dangerous men. Peterson, clearly impressed by Sullivan's obvious wealth and authority, was nodding sympathetically. Terrible situation, Mr. Sullivan. I'll certainly spread the word. Poor lady, these female hysteria cases are always tragic. Indeed, Sullivan agreed. The doctors in Denver have been treating her condition, but the stress of travel seems to have triggered an episode. She may appear perfectly rational when found, but I assure you, it's merely part of her illness. Axel gathered his supplies quickly, paying without engaging in his usual brief exchange with Peterson. As he turned to leave, he found himself face to face with Sullivan, who was examining him with mild curiosity. I don't believe we've met, Sullivan said, extending his hand. Edwin Sullivan. Axel shifted his packages and briefly shook the offered hand. Adam Smith. Small spread north of town. You haven't seen a woman wandering alone, have you, Mr. Smith? My wife has wandered off in a state of distress. Dark hair, green eyes, about so tall. He indicated with his hand. Can't say I have, Axel replied evenly, but I'll keep an eye out. Please do. There's a substantial reward. Sullivan's eyes narrowed slightly. She needs protection from herself primarily. She's been known to invent wild stories when in the grip of her delusions. I'll remember that, Axel said, tipping his hat and moving toward the door. Smith, Sullivan called after him. She's my wife. Anyone interfering with my right to retrieve her will answer to me and to the law. The threat was thinly veiled, but Axel merely nodded and continued outside. As he loaded his supplies onto Diablo, the sheriff approached, a weather-beaten man named Hargrove whom Axel knew only in passing. Grimes, the sheriff acknowledged. Haven't seen you in town for a spell. Been busy with the herd, Axel replied. Something I can help you with, Sheriff? Hargrove gestured toward the hotel. That man Sullivan's causing quite a stir. Powerful connections all the way to the territorial governor, apparently. Says his wife's run off. Not in her right mind. So I heard. Thought I'd ask if you've seen anything unusual out your way. Woman traveling alone would stand out. Axel tightened Diablo's cinch strap. Nothing but coyotes and my cattle. The sheriff studied him a moment longer than necessary. Well, if you do see something, there's a duty to report it. Man has a right to his wife. And does a wife have no rights of her own? Axel asked quietly. Hargrove frowned. That's not for me to judge. Law says she's his responsibility. Law says a lot of things, Sheriff. Doesn't make them right. With that, Axel swung into the saddle and headed out of town, conscious of the sheriff's gaze following him. The encounter left him uneasy. Sullivan's story was well crafted. Who would question a wealthy, respectable gentleman about his disturbed wife? The law would be on Sullivan's side if Rachel were discovered. Halfway back to his cabin, Axel diverted to a small creek where he often fished. There he examined his saddlebags thoroughly, checking for anything suspicious. Finding nothing, he continued home by a circuitous route, watching carefully for any sign of being followed. Rachel was waiting anxiously by the window, shotgun ready, when he approached. Relief washed over her face as she recognized him and set the weapon aside. "You're back," she said as he entered. "I was worried. Had to take a longer route. Make sure I wasn't followed." Axel unloaded his supplies, placing a small paper-wrapped package on the table in front of her. "Brought you something." Rachel unwrapped the package to find a small cake of lavender soap and a sturdy hairbrush. Her fingers traced the simple items with wonder, as though they were precious treasures. "I thought you might want. I mean, I know it's not much, but—" Axel stammered, suddenly uncomfortable with his own gesture. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Thank you." They shared a simple meal as Axel recounted what he'd learned in town. Rachel's face paled when he described Sullivan's story about her mental condition. "It's clever," she said bitterly. "Who would believe my word against his? A wealthy, respected businessman versus his hysterical wife." "I believe you," Axel said simply. Rachel looked up, genuine surprise in her eyes. "Why? You hardly know me." Axel considered his answer carefully. "In my former line of work, I learned to read people. Had to know if someone was lying to save their skin." He gestured to her fading bruise. "Besides, that mark on your face tells a clearer story than any words." "Former line of work?" she asked. "I was a bounty hunter for 8 years after the war." Rachel absorbed this information. "Is that why you live so far from town? From people?" "Partly." Axel stood and moved to stoke the fire, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "People tend to remember a man who's brought in their kin for hanging, deserved or not." "And the other part?" she pressed gently. Axel's jaw tightened. "Some ghosts are best left undisturbed, Mrs. Sullivan." "Rachel," she corrected. "If I'm to impose on your hospitality, at least call me by my given name." "Rachel," he agreed, the name feeling unexpectedly right on his tongue. Over the next few days, they fell into an uneasy routine. Axel tended his cattle and ranch chores during the day while Rachel kept to the cabin, gradually recovering her strength. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation that grew incrementally more comfortable. Axel discovered that beneath her initial fragility, Rachel possessed a sharp mind and unexpected resilience. She told him about growing up as the daughter of a shopkeeper in St. Louis, about her passion for books and learning that her father had encouraged. After her parents died of influenza when she was 20, she'd found herself alone and vulnerable. Edwin Sullivan, 20 years her senior and seemingly kind, had appeared as a savior, offering marriage and security. The change didn't happen immediately, she explained one evening as they sat by the fire. At first, he was everything he'd appeared to be: attentive, generous. Then came small criticisms, controlling behaviors. By the time the first blow came, a year into our marriage, I was already isolated from anyone who might have helped me. Why now? Axel asked. Why run after 3 years? Rachel stared into the flames. I discovered I was with child 2 months ago, she said quietly. The last time Edwin lost his temper, I fell. There was blood. I lost the baby. Her voice broke. I knew then that if I stayed, the next child would suffer the same fate. Or worse. I couldn't bear it. Axel's hands clenched involuntarily at his sides. In that moment, he understood the depth of his own developing feelings for Rachel and why they were impossible. A woman like her, educated and refined despite her circumstances, deserved better than a former bounty hunter with blood on his hands. Once Sullivan was dealt with, she would continue to Oregon, build a new life, and he would return to his solitude. We need to get you safely away, he said, forcing practicality into his voice. Sullivan won't give up easily, but his business in Cheyenne won't wait forever. Once he moves on, we can arrange passage for you. And if he doesn't move on? Rachel asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address. On the 7th day of Rachel's stay, Axel returned from checking fence lines to find her outside the cabin, standing in a patch of wildflowers that grew alongside the creek that bordered his property. Her hair, now clean and brushed, caught the afternoon sunlight, transforming the dark strands into rich mahogany. She had washed her dress, now mended and dried, and stood with her face tilted toward the sun, eyes closed. Something tightened in Axel's chest at the sight. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine a different life, one where a woman like Rachel might choose to stay, not out of necessity but desire. The fantasy died quickly. He knew better than to indulge such thoughts. You shouldn't be outside, he called, dismounting. Someone could see you. Rachel turned, a smile warming her face. Who? Your nearest neighbor is miles away, as you've told me repeatedly. Besides, she gestured to the wildflowers, I couldn't resist. It's been so long since I felt free to simply stand in the sun. Axel couldn't argue with the transformation the brief liberty had wrought. Color had returned to her cheeks, and the perpetual wariness in her eyes had momentarily retreated. Still not safe, he grumbled, but without real conviction. I picked these for supper, she said, showing him a handful of wild onions. And I've made biscuits. The dough is rising. The simple domesticity of the scene, Rachel gathering food for their meal, the mention of fresh biscuits struck Axel with unexpected force. His cabin had never been a home, merely shelter. Now, somehow, this woman had brought warmth into spaces he hadn't realized were cold. That evening, as they ate together, Axel found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone about growing up in Kentucky. His service in the Union Army during the war, his decision to head west afterward rather than return to a home that no longer existed. My family's farm was burned by raiders, he explained. Parents died before the war ended. There was nothing to go back to. So you became a bounty hunter? Rachel asked. Axel nodded. I was good with a gun and tracking. Seemed a way to make use of skills the war taught me. It must have been a hard life. It was honest work. Most men I tracked deserved what was coming to them. He hesitated. Not all, though. Sometimes the law gets it wrong. Rachel studied him across the table. Is that why you stopped? Because the law got it wrong. Axel set down his fork. 3 years ago, I tracked a man named Thomas Reed, wanted for killing a banker in Topeka. caught up to him in the Colorado mountains. He swore he was innocent, but they all say that. I brought him in. His voice grew tight. He hung 2 days later. A month after, they caught the real killer with the stolen money. Reed had just been in the wrong place. That wasn't your fault, Rachel said softly. I was so sure he was guilty. So certain. Axel's eyes met hers. After that, I couldn't do it anymore. Bought this place, as far from people as I could manage. And have you found peace here? The question was gentle but penetrating. Axel considered it honestly. Not peace, but purpose, maybe. Something that's mine, that I built with my own hands. It's a good life you've made, Rachel said. Thank you for sharing it with me, even temporarily. Later that night, as Axel lay on his bedroll listening to Rachel's steady breathing from the bed, he acknowledged the truth he'd been avoiding. He was falling in love with her. The realization brought no joy, only a dull ache of inevitability. Men like him didn't get happy endings. The best he could do was ensure she reached safety, then return to the life he deserved alone. The following morning, Axel woke before dawn, troubled by dreams he couldn't recall. A sense of unease drove him outside to check the surrounding area. The early light revealed nothing unusual, yet the feeling persisted. Years of tracking had honed his instincts. Something wasn't right. He returned to find Rachel awake and brewing coffee. We need to be careful today, he said without preamble. Something doesn't feel right. Rachel immediately tensed. Do you think someone's found us? Not sure, but I'm going to scout the area, make sure. After a hurried breakfast, Axel prepared to leave. Before mounting Diablo, he took Rachel's hands in his, noticing how small they felt within his calloused grip. Stay inside. Keep the shotgun close. If anyone comes, I know, she interrupted, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. I'll be fine. Please be careful. On impulse, Axel raised her hand to his lips, pressing a brief kiss to her knuckles. The gesture surprised them both. Rachel's eyes widened, and a flush colored her cheeks. I'll be back before midday, he promised, releasing her hand and turning quickly to his horse. Axel rode in widening circles around his property, alert for any sign of intruders. 2 hours into his search, he found what he feared: fresh hoofprints crossing the creek at its shallowest point, heading toward his cabin. At least 3 horses, possibly 4. Cursing under his breath, Axel spurred Diablo into a gallop, taking a direct route back. As he crested the final rise overlooking his property, he saw them 3 riders approaching the cabin from the east, still a quarter mile out but moving with purpose. Even at this distance, he recognized Edwin Sullivan's tall figure leading the group. Axel cut across country, determined to reach the cabin before them. He pushed Diablo harder than he ever had, the horse responding to his urgency. He reached the cabin moments before the riders came into view from the main trail. Dismounting in a rush, he burst through the door to find Rachel standing by the window, shotgun already in her hands. They're coming, she said, her voice remarkably steady. Edwin and 2 others. There's a root cellar under the floorboards behind the stove, Axel said, moving quickly to the bed where he kept his gun belt. If things go wrong, I'm not hiding, Rachel interrupted, her jaw set with determination. Not anymore. Rachel, no. Her eyes flashed with newfound strength. I ran once. I won't spend my life running. Whatever happens, we face it together. Axel wanted to argue but recognized the resolve in her expression. Instead, he positioned himself near the window, checking his Colt one final time. Stay behind me, he said. Let me do the talking. The riders pulled up outside, Sullivan and 2 rough-looking men Axel didn't recognize. Not locals, he noted, hired guns, most likely. You in the cabin, Sullivan called. I know you're harboring my wife. Send her out now, and there won't be trouble. Axel opened the door but remained in the doorway, blocking entry. There's no one here but me, Sullivan. Sullivan dismounted, his movements precise and controlled. Up close, Axel could see the cold calculation in the man's eyes, a coldness at odds with his civilized appearance. Mr. Smith, or should I say, Mr. Grimes? Did you think I wouldn't make inquiries about every rancher in the area? Sullivan's smile never reached his eyes. Your reputation precedes you. 15 men dead, I'm told. Fair fights, Axel replied evenly, which is more than I can say for a man who beats his wife. Sullivan's expression hardened. My domestic affairs are none of your concern. The law recognizes my right to discipline my household as I see fit. The law also recognizes murder, Axel countered. How would you explain Rachel's death if your discipline went too far next time? A flicker of surprise crossed Sullivan's face at Axel's knowledge of such details. Behind him, Sullivan's men shifted in their saddles, hands hovering near their weapons. Rachel, Sullivan called loudly. Come out now. You've caused enough embarrassment. From inside the cabin, Rachel's voice rang out clearly. I'm never coming back to you, Edwin. Never. Sullivan's face contorted with rage, the mask of civility slipping. You have no choice. You're my wife. Not anymore, Rachel replied, stepping forward to stand beside Axel in the doorway. Though she trembled slightly, her voice remained firm. I would rather die than return to that life. Axel felt a surge of pride mixed with fear for her safety. Standing in the open doorway, Rachel made an easy target if Sullivan's men decided to shoot. Sullivan's expression shifted, becoming almost reasonable. Rachel, darling, you're unwell. These delusions, they're part of your condition. The doctors in Denver explained everything. Come home, and we'll get you the help you need. The only condition I suffer from is having believed your lies for too long, Rachel responded. There are no doctors, no treatments. Only your fists and your cruelty. Sullivan's false reasonableness vanished. Enough. I won't be humiliated by a hysterical woman. He turned to his men. Get her. Kill him if he interferes. As the hired guns reached for their weapons, Axel drew with the lightning speed that had made him legendary. His first shot caught the man on the right in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. The second man managed to fire, but his bullet went wide as Axel's second shot found its mark in the man's thigh. Sullivan, seeing his advantage disappear, drew his own pistol. But years behind a desk had made him slow. Before he could aim, Axel's gun was leveled at his chest. Drop it, Axel commanded. For a tense moment, Sullivan seemed to consider his options. Then, with a curse, he let his pistol fall to the ground. You can't win, Sullivan snarled. She's my wife. Every lawman in the territory will be looking for her. Not if they know the truth, Rachel said, stepping forward. She turned to Axel. There's proof in my case at the hotel. Edwin keeps a journal. He records everything, including what he does to me. He takes pride in it. Sullivan lunged toward her with a roar of rage, but Axel's fist connected with his jaw, dropping him to the ground. As Sullivan struggled to rise, Axel placed a boot firmly on his chest. Here's what's going to happen, Axel said, his voice low and dangerous. You're going to leave Rachel alone. Forever. You'll sign whatever papers are needed to dissolve this marriage, and then you'll return to Colorado and never set foot in Wyoming again. And why would I do that? Sullivan spat, blood trickling from his split lip. Because if you don't, Axel continued, I'll make sure every newspaper from here to Denver receives copies of your journal. How will your business partners react to learning what kind of man they're dealing with? How many cattle will you sell when your reputation is destroyed? Fear flickered in Sullivan's eyes for the first time. You're bluffing. You don't have the journal. Not yet, Axel agreed. But Sheriff Hargrove will accompany Rachel to retrieve her belongings, including that journal, while you remain under guard. He increased the pressure of his boot. Or I could simply kill you now and claim self-defense. Your men would testify that you drew first if they want to live. The wounded men, seeing which way the wind was blowing, were quick to nod their agreement. Sullivan's face contorted with hate, but Axel saw the moment when calculation replaced rage. The man was, above all, a businessman. He knew when a deal had gone bad. Fine, Sullivan finally growled. She's not worth the trouble, but she leaves with nothing. The clothes on her back, nothing more. The journal and her personal belongings, Axel countered, and a written statement renouncing all claims to her. The negotiation continued as Axel bound Sullivan's hands and secured his hired guns, both nursing painful but non-lethal wounds. By mid-afternoon, Sheriff Hargrove had arrived, initially skeptical until Rachel showed him the still visible bruises and described in detail the abuse she had suffered. The journal, retrieved from Sullivan's hotel room under the sheriff's supervision, proved even more damning than Rachel had indicated. Sullivan, facing the ruin of his reputation and possible criminal charges, capitulated entirely, signing papers that the town's only lawyer hastily drew up. By sunset it was done. Sullivan and his men departed on the evening stage to Denver, with the sheriff's stern warning never to return. Rachel, officially free for the first time in years, stood on the boardwalk outside the Golden Rail Hotel, watching the stagecoach disappear in a cloud of dust. Axel stood silently beside her, uncertain what came next. The urgency that had drawn them together was gone. Rachel had her freedom, and with it, choices that no longer included needing his protection. "Will you still go to Oregon?" he asked finally. Rachel turned to him, studying his face in the fading light. "Is that what you want me to do?" The question caught him off guard. "It's not about what I want, isn't it?" She moved closer. "These past days with you, Axel, they've shown me what it means to be truly respected, truly protected. Not out of possession, but out of—" She hesitated. "Care," Axel supplied, not ready to use the word that really described his feelings. "Is that all it is? Care?" Rachel's eyes searched his. "Because what I feel for you goes beyond gratitude or even friendship. If you want me to go, I'll understand. But if there's any chance that you might want me to stay—" Axel's carefully constructed defenses crumbled. "I want you to stay," he admitted roughly. "God help me. I've wanted it since the moment you stood up to Sullivan. But I'm not the man you deserve, Rachel. My hands aren't clean." "Neither are mine," she said softly. "We've both survived the best way we knew how. Perhaps together, we can find a better way forward." Axel reached for her then, drawing her gently into his arms. When their lips met, the kiss was tentative at first, then deepening with the release of feelings both had held tightly in check. Around them, Redemption's main street bustled with evening activity, but they remained oblivious to curious glances and whispered comments. When they finally pulled apart, Axel rested his forehead against hers. "I can't offer you much," he warned. "Just a small cabin and a hard life." Rachel smiled, truly smiled, for perhaps the first time since he'd met her. "You're offering me freedom, respect, and partnership. That's more than most women ever receive." They returned to Axel's ranch that evening, the journey quiet but filled with a new certainty. The cabin that had once seemed merely functional to Axel now appeared through new eyes, not as a refuge from the world, but as the beginning of something he'd never dared to imagine for himself. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Rachel became Mrs. Axel Grimes in a simple ceremony performed by the circuit preacher. The small gathering included Sheriff Hargrove, who had become an unexpected ally, and a handful of neighboring ranchers with whom Axel had cautiously begun to build connections. After the guests departed, Axel and Rachel stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant orange and gold. Rachel's hand rested on the slight swell of her belly, evidence of the child they would welcome in the spring. "Are you happy?" Axel asked, his arm around her shoulders. Rachel leaned into his embrace. "More than I ever believed possible." She turned in his arms to face him. "Are you?" Axel considered the question seriously. The ghosts of his past hadn't vanished entirely, perhaps they never would. But their voices had grown quieter, drowned out by the sound of Rachel's laughter, by the plans they made together, by the future taking shape before them. "Yes," he answered truthfully. "For the first time in my life, I believe I am." As twilight deepened into night, they returned inside to the warmth of their home. On the wall hung Axel's gun belt, unused now except for protection against the occasional predator threatening their growing herd. Beside it rested Rachel's journal, no longer a record of pain, but filled instead with observations of their daily life, her hopes for their child, and passages that made Axel blush when she read them aloud. In the years that followed, the small ranch prospered. Axel's knowledge of cattle and Rachel's head for business proved a formidable combination. Their first child, a daughter named Elizabeth after Rachel's mother, was joined 2 years later by a son they called James, honoring Axel's father. Word of Sullivan reached them, occasionally rumors of financial troubles, then bankruptcy, finally a quiet death that brought Rachel no joy but did close a chapter definitively. By then, those events seemed to belong to another lifetime, disconnected from the full and peaceful existence they had built. On the 10th anniversary of the night Rachel had appeared trembling in the shadows beside his woodpile, Axel stood watching his children chase fireflies in the summer dusk. Rachel joined him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How close I came to missing this," he answered honestly. "If I'd returned from town an hour later that night, if the storm had taken a different path." Rachel squeezed his hand. "But you didn't, and it didn't. Some things are meant to be, Axel." He turned to look at her, still beautiful to him, perhaps more so now that the years had added character to her face and silver threads to her hair. "I never thought a man like me deserved happiness. And now," Axel smiled, pulling her close, "now I know better than to argue with fate." As darkness settled fully over the Wyoming prairie, they called the children in for supper. The cabin, expanded over the years into a proper ranch house, glowed with lamplight and resonated with the sounds of family children's laughter, the clatter of dishes, the comfortable rhythm of lives intertwined. Later, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Axel and Rachel sat together before the hearth. The same fireplace that had warmed a frightened, desperate woman on a stormy night now centered a home filled with love and security. "Do you ever regret it?" Axel asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of going to Oregon? Your life could have been easier in a city." Rachel considered the question, then shook her head. "Never. This life, our life, has given me everything I truly needed." She leaned against his shoulder. "Besides, what's easy compared to finding where you truly belong?" Axel placed a kiss on the top of her head, marveling still at how this woman had transformed his existence. A man who once thought himself beyond redemption had found it in the most unexpected place, in the courage of a woman who had refused to let fear define her future, and in doing so had rewritten his own. Outside, the endless Wyoming sky stretched above their land, stars scattered like promises across the darkness. Inside, the warmth of home sheltered the life they had built together, not perfect, not without challenges, but theirs, completely and irrevocably theirs. And for a man who had once believed he had no right to love, that was more than enough. It was everything.